This follows 6 months of leaderless turmoil, mass protests, and deepening polarization after a power grab by then-President Yoon Suk-yeol, who declared martial law on December 3rd. Even though Yoon has now been impeached from office, deep divisions remain. Today I'm speaking about the unprecedented challenges facing South Korea ahead of next week's snap elections with the South Korea columnist for The Diplomat, Yoon Lee, who is just outside the capital, Seoul. Yoon Lee, very welcome to the State of Asia podcast.
All right, thanks for inviting me.
So South Korea is used to volatile politics at the highest level, but the last 6 months seem to have been something else. December 3rd, 2024, then President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, vowing to rebuild a democratic and free Korea after accusing his political opposition, which had won a majority in parliamentary elections earlier in the year, of being, his words, communist and likely agents for North Korea, which is, of course, a huge red flag for a South Korean audience. Seemingly immediately after he declared martial law, street protests erupted. Politicians managed to break through a barrier of military and security forces to enter the parliament chambers, where within hours after Yoon's declaration, they voted to annul his declaration of martial law. And I think the images of that night kind of carry an iconic weight for those who remember them, especially seeing parliamentarians counter armed soldiers to force their way into the parliament house and exercise their democratic powers. Now, at that time, no one could really predict where this would go. The military might have well followed orders they were given to use force to prevent that vote if necessary.
Yeah.
That went the other way. The impeachment vote went ahead. And ever since, South Korea has pretty much been leaderless. On April 4th, the Constitutional Court unanimously confirmed the impeachment of President Yoon, now making him the ex-president, and removing him from office and making way for the elections coming up next week. And I just yesterday looked at a list of presidents of South Korea, either in full office or acting presidents. And it just makes clear how unstable the current situation is. The presidency changed hands 4 times since December. I think the current one just started work 3 weeks ago. And will have to leave office right after the elections of June 3rd. So that's what we're dealing with at this moment. And I wanted to ask you, in its unanimous verdict upholding the impeachment of former President Yoon, the Constitutional Court ended with stating that Yoon's acts amounted to a serious violation and a betrayal of public trust.
Yes.
First, could you maybe just describe the mood in South Korea over the past 6 months?
So let me just start back from December. So when it first happened, of course, there was this initial shock and disbelief, and then there was also so I believe South Koreans were deprived of a sense of reality. Like there's been a sense of ungroundedness wherever you go, whoever you strike up a conversation with. Everyone talks about martial law and Yoon's impeachment and the snap election. Were the only ones that people talked about. That's a good indication of how much it has occupied our national psyche. So that was very traumatic, and there's a very long way to go. And then we witnessed this very dramatic kind of cloak and dagger scenery in January as the president defied his search warrant with using his presidential security bodyguards. So it was like a roller coaster of feelings for South Koreans for the past 6 months.
The court, in its upholding of the impeachment of former President Yoon, clearly says, well, he betrayed public trust. Is that public trust, how would you describe it at the moment, just ahead of the next election? How is public trust in government, in the government institutions? Because you could also say, well, the institutions were able to withstand a power grab by a sitting president. So maybe it has increased trust, or is that extremely naive of me to think that?
To be completely honest, public trust in South Korean institutions is at an all-time low. The police, the military, and other ministries, they all colluded with President Yoon for martial law months prior. Martial law didn't take off, not because those institutions didn't collaborate. They actually collaborated. The top brass were in cahoots with Yoon to the full extent. It just failed because they were incompetent. What the South Korean public really wants is to see a great extent of reform in those institutions so that we can divest some power and evenly distribute those powers to different government employees rather than concentrating it on a few key figures.
About the change in the way South Korea is governed, the system, the current democratic constitution. It's been in force since 1987 after years of rule by former generals.
Yeah.
And it allows the president to be office for only a single 5-year term.
Yeah.
And since then, many presidents have ended their single terms in disgrace, including being prosecuted and jailed for corruption or just record low public approval ratings. It kind of seems standard operating procedure almost for each new president, especially if they're from the other party than the predecessor, to make sure to prosecute and punish their predecessor. Can you explain why is that? And is a change to the power of the presidency under whoever becomes the next leader, is that likely to happen? Because I can imagine if I would now become the next president and I only still have a single term under the current rules, I'm not going to change that. I'm just going to...
Yeah, I mean, you actually pointed out something that's very problematic and that needs changing in our South Korean political system in terms of like power changing hands. So we have a very vicious cycle of prosecutors. They just change their allegiance as the regime changes. So the problem is our prosecution service is not really politically independent. I mean, as an agency of law enforcement, they should be independent and fair and only caring about justice. But what the prosecutors are doing in South Korea is they are enforcing selective justice according to political favors. Former President Roh Moo-hyun, he committed suicide in 2009 because of political retribution by the successor president, using the prosecutors just cracking down on his family with bogus charges and investigations. So he committed suicide because he was embarrassed and he couldn't handle it. And then the same thing happened with former President Lee Myung-bak and Park Geun-hye. Ms. Park was impeached. I mean, sometimes the prosecutors' investigations are justifiable due to rampant corruption, but most of the time they just dig up dirt as political retribution. And we're looking at a stark example this time as well. Former President Yoon Suk-yeol, he used to be the chief prosecutor. So when he was in power, all the prosecutors were his men. So they were cowering before him. Yoon and his family were entirely shielded from all sorts of investigations. But now that Yoon was officially impeached, the prosecutors are starting to zero in on Yoon and his family. So we're looking at it again, like the cycle of prosecutors being just exercising a great turnabout in loyalty. And at Lee, he has a lot of court cases pending on his head. So the prosecutors wanted to finish him off before he could become president, but that failed. So, but yeah, you're right. That's something that we need to deal with.
You mentioned Lee Jae-myung. He's in the race to become the next president, the clear favorite at this moment. He also ran against Yoon Suk-yeol in the last election in 2022, I believe, but lost narrowly. And then there's Kim Won-soo of the Conservative People Power Party, the party of impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. What are some of the large domestic challenges that the new president will have to deal with right after he enters office in June?
The largest domestic challenge for any incoming president to tackle, I believe, would be our political polarization. It has never been this bad in the past. Like, it's very acute, it's very debilitating, it's very insidious to such an extent that any government cannot rule with much legitimacy when there's so much polarization going on, when the electorate is split. For instance, when it comes to dealing with North Korea, or when it comes to talking about this conspiracy theory of election fraud, there's this block on the right and then there's the block on the left. We're split so even, there's no bridgeable gap. So any president, if they want to be successful or field a viable policy, they need to kind of gain some groundswell support. But in our current turf, gaining groundswell support is something that's not feasible.
I read a while ago an article by Chun-Min Lee, an expert at the Carnegie Endowment on Korea. And he wrote, it's very cliche to say that a country stands at a critical crossroads, but it's truly the case with South Korea today. And he talks about, like you did just now as well, unparalleled divisions and the country having, in his words, a last chance right now to begin resetting its broken political system with the upcoming elections. Do you agree with him? It sounds extremely dramatic.
I actually can't agree with him more. So we are indeed at a watershed moment. Politics shouldn't be about government changing hands and then whoever comes on top retaliates against the losers, and then that cycle continues on. And we've clearly seen how that could end up. That Yoon Suk-yeol was fully bent over backwards against the progressives and Lee, and then that that sentiment led to martial law and then almost the end of South Korean democracy. I should like to add something to Changmin Lee's point in terms of South Korea's international survivability. South Korea shouldn't be split into political camps anymore. I mean, it's okay to discuss different ideas and different policies, but when it comes to dealing with international crises, our opinions shouldn't really be divided. But the problem is, as our domestic agenda are split along partisan lines, so are our foreign policy approaches. There's this duality and dichotomy of conceiving of foreign policy that's fundamentally linked to progressivism and conservatism. And that kind of constricts our thinking about and approaching to foreign policy. That shouldn't really be hindering our responses to volatile global environments.
Let's dive a little bit into that volatile global environment, as you rightly call it. First, there's always North Korea, of course, as a persistent and perhaps now growing threat. North Korea seems to have gotten a lot closer with China, with Russia, of course, with the involvement of the North Korean military in the war in Ukraine. At the same time, as South Korea was leaderless, a lot of other stuff happened in the world, not the least the start of the second Trump administration in the US, creating a much more uncertain future for what seemed to be a rock-solid alliance between Korea and the United States. I think there's still, 26,000 US soldiers based in Korea at the moment. How about these geopolitical challenges the new president faces? Do you think whoever it will be, although it will likely be Lee, is he up to that, to actually help Korea step forward as a credible geopolitical player?
So when it comes to North Korea and handling South Korea-US alliance, whoever becomes the next president, although I think Lee Jae-myung is highly likely to become the next president. I mean, inter-Korean relations have always been at the forefront of our concerns for both South Koreans and the president. North Korea, the Trump administration is they're demanding that South Koreans pay up more for the U.S. forces in Korea. It kind of made sense back when Washington used to be all in and fully cooperative and fully appreciative of bilateral alliance and loyalty. It made sense to pick a side. I mean, when our approaches in loyalty are fully reciprocated. But now that's not the case anymore. Trump is, like I said, he doesn't treat an ally as an ally should treat a fellow ally. So within this changed environment, the next incoming president will be more justified in becoming friendlier to China or to North Korea. I mean, it makes sense because the Washington is not as friendly and open as it used to be. So within this vein, Lee Jae-myung there will be more people welcoming Lee's wanting to achieve a strategic autonomy, and strategic autonomy not to the degree and the sense, not to the same sense that France and the UK can afford, but in the sense that we get to rely less on the US forces in South Korea. And also the General Xavier Robinson, he's the commander of the United States forces in Korea. He recently underlined the importance of his forces in countering China and North Korea. That was a very significant statement because previously the United States forces in Korea they're stationed in South Korean soil to protect South Korea against the North, and that was the agreement. That's why South Koreans they're footing the bill for the U.S. presence. But now that his commander is saying that it's not just for North Koreans, it's also for against China and Russia, and that kind of it just puts off a lot of South Korean taxpayers. We didn't sign up for this. Why are we paying the bills to protect Taiwan or for U.S. military interests against Russia and China? So that's also another area where Lee could be pushing against Washington to redress or as an excuse not to pay more for the U.S. presence.
You mentioned China a few times. In the recent past, there has been kind of a surprising revival of a dialogue between China, Korea and Japan on like economic level and other diplomatic levels. How should we interpret that? Is that bond going to be closer, even though there are, of course, tensions on other fields?
It's true. You're right that the Seoul and Beijing have gotten a lot closer than in the beginning when Yoon took the presidency. I mean, our relations have been souring for quite some time now, especially back in 2017 when South Korea installed the U.S. terminal high altitude area defense missiles, and then so that was the nadir of our relations. But then like it has gradually picked up over time until the Yoon administration and Yoon personally started spreading this rumor that it was the Chinese spies and Chinese residents in South Korea that rigged our general elections. So Beijing was deeply vexed about this conspiracy theory and by the fact that the Yoon administration was actively spreading this conspiracy theory. So before China could actually retaliate against this conspiracy theory, because China is really good at showing their resentment and anger. But before that could happen, the Yoon regime collapsed. So we're seeing, like you mentioned, we're seeing a step towards an improved relation because China is even thinking about relaxing visa regulation for incoming South Korean citizens to China. So that's a great step forward. But our bilateral relations can dramatically change again depending on who becomes the next president. For instance, if Lee becomes the president, I mean, the relations it's gonna continue to improve, because Lee, of course, is he likes to straddle between China and the U.S. Whereas if Kim Moon-soo becomes the president, Kim Moon-soo is one of those who also believe in the election fraud. And then he's really against Chinese people, and then he was supporting far right South Korea's young far right males staging anti-Chinese marches in Seoul. Like Kim Moon-soo was actually supportive of that. So, and then Kim wants to open and pursue investigations into the conspiracy theory. And then he's going to be looking into, and even she's going to be arresting some Chinese nationals in South Korea as a result of that. And then Beijing is not going to stay put. There's going to be another round of hostility and unfavorable political backlashes. As for our relations with Japan, I mean, you're right. Our relations have dramatically picked up ever since Yoon came into presidency, because he chose not to pursue our unresolved historical issues over Japan's colonial and wartime atrocities. But that could change a bit if Lee becomes the president, because although Lee recently said that he likes Japan and that he would love to work with Japan, but he still mentioned that, yes, of course, I want to work with Japan, but that there are some issues that we shouldn't gloss over. And then surely Tokyo. I mean, Japan has never been happy to talk about their historical past. They'll be unreluctant to collaborate on resolving historical feud. But then Lee could dangle these historical issues as a condition for progressing our security and economic relations. But I doubt that Lee would go so far as to sacrifice our security and economic relations for some historical issues. There's such pressing need to tackle with global security and economic issues that Lee is a very practical person, and I doubt that he will go so far pursuing historical issues to the extent that we're going to give up on mutual security and economic cooperation with Japan. Whereas if Kim becomes the president, he's just like Yoon. He's never going to talk about historical issues. So South Korea-Japan relations will continue as it is if Kim becomes the president.
We've talked a bit about the deep divisions in Korean society. One of the lines along which a sharp division is clearly visible is gender. Impeached President Yoon really pulled in the vote of young men in Korea back in 2022, also by promising to abolish the Ministry for Gender Equality. In this election that's happening June 3rd, for the first time in 18 years, all the presidential candidates are men. So I read that in the National Assembly, only 61 out of 300 seats are occupied by women, placing South Korea 35th out of 38 OECD countries. Women online are now saying they feel like democracy is going backwards for them. And back in February, you wrote a piece in The Diplomat with the headline, "The Rise of the Angry Young Men," saying that gender again is determining the flow of South Korea's political upheaval. And in that piece, you write that the through line for the political crisis in Korea of the past months is the increased visibility of young men at the forefront of violent clashes, defending the martial law and the authoritarian intentions of the then President Yoon. And you cited a Gallup poll from January in that piece, where 40% of males in their 20s and 30s said they were conservative, with more than a third of them supporting the People Power Party of President Yoon. And they've been fomenting violence both online and in real life. That's a very, very stubborn division, it seems, because it's not something that only became visible since December. It's been coming up about, when you talk about Korea, this is one of the first things that comes up again and again, just the division on gender in society. What's going on?
So simply put, young South Korean men and women, they hate each other. Young South Korean males, they're angry because they perceive that women are not at a disadvantage, but they are complaining about their circumstances in South Korea. I mean, of course, it's not correct. There are glaring gender pay gaps, and then gender inequality, and then gender-specific crimes, domestic violence, and poor salaries, and no prospect of promotion, and then severance of career once women become pregnant. But ignoring all this, South Korean males just focus on a few sectors where there are more women employed. Our labor market is saturated with highly educated, college-educated men and women, and then competition is really high. And then it just so happened that there are some sectors where there are more women, and then males just look at that and then they feel like, oh, well, this is not right. We don't need female quota anymore. They also point out the fact that, oh, we have to do the mandatory military service, so we sacrifice up to 2 years of our life. So why? So we are the ones at a disadvantage, is what South Korean males are saying. And then they say that women are complaining too much. And then on the other hand, South Korean women, I mean, they're righteously indignant at all the patriarchal discrimination and all the structural inequality. And then the fact that the society and the government can't alleviate this issue. And because of all their frustration, they feel like South Korean men are like losers. Some of them are really misogynistic. That's true. So they don't really want to associate or hang out or date South Korean males. So there's this mutual animosity between along the gender divide, and then they kind of spilled over into politics and then politicians actually exploited this gender divide to their benefit as a way to garner more votes. Because I mean, you're fully aware that back in 2022. Probably the only reason President Yoon won that election was because of his policy, because he managed to attract so many South Korean young males, because they have this immense voter cohesion for South Korean males. They always flock together when voting. So they have this sort of like voting and social power when it comes to that. And then the Yoon came up onto the platform and said, well, I'm going to abolish the Ministry of Gender Equality. And that was that. And then he just won by a wafer margin of like 0.2%. The Democratic Party and Lee Jae-myung, on the other hand, he says he's a feminist, although not as feminist as compared to the standards in the West. But in our standard, he's a feminist. And then he actually some sensible feminist policies in the pipeline. And because of that, a lot of young South Korean women are supporting the DP and Lee Jae-myung, whereas South Korean males are supporting the PPP. Another point that I want to mention is the pro-Yoon impeachment marches that started in December, and then they continued until his official impeachment by the Constitutional Court in April. Those marches and protests were led largely by young South Korean women, because they were not only fighting against martial law, but also their equal rights, how the Yoon administration was always turning a blind eye to their problems. And just South Korean men, they just didn't want to see that. They just didn't want to see the environment where women are taking the lead, where women are going to get paid more. But the core problem, I would say, is it's a social ill. I mean, I don't want to blame South Korean men or South Korean women for hating each other. I don't want to blame anybody. It's just how an unhealthy structural system created an environment where people have no choice but to compete against each other until they die, or they're forced to find scapegoats within a crooked system.
I read that back in 2017, the huge candlelight protests against then President Park, who was accused of corruption and eventually impeached as well. She's in jail now, right?
She was pardoned by Yoon. So she's out of...
Of course, yeah. my question is, back in 2017, those huge protests against then President Park were really both men and women standing there and demanding that she leave. While, as you just mentioned, the protests against President Yoon and during the entire impeachment process were very much split along those lines of angry young men pro-Yoon, and then mostly women protesting for his impeachment and kicking him out of office. Is there anything you can point to that happened between 2017 and now that really caused that split to occur? Why weren't there also just young men and women together protesting against the martial law?
Well, there have been some scandals in 2017 and 2022, and even 2024 that really drove a wedge between men and women. I mean, it's a lot of... I mean, I'm not sure if it's appropriate to go into much detail, but there has been an issue about a female police officer who fled the scene of crime because she was scared of a male criminal, and then the victims died because the female police officer had to flee the scene. And then there was a widespread backlash against hiring female police officers. That incident, young South Korean males, when they heard about it, they were like, well, this is unacceptable. We should get rid of any and all pro-female, pro-feminist policies. We just need to hire based on competency and strength. So there was that. It was huge. There was a huge argument and debate and protest because of that. And then another incident was where there was a male nude model posing for an art class at a university, and then a female artist took a photo of the male nude model and then posted his photos online. So that's a sexual crime. You shouldn't be taking photos of a naked person and posting it online. That's a crime, but perpetrated by a female artist against a male model. And then the police arrested the female artist on sexual crime charges. But then there was... South Korean females were really angry because if the perpetrator was a male, police officers wouldn't have been so enthusiastic about investigating or arresting the perpetrator. So they were pointing out how the police applies different standards. They have a double standard when it comes to pursuing female criminals and male criminals. And then there are other... there was, of course, Me Too movement as well, and the males didn't like the fact that how popular famous male figures committed suicide because of the Me Too movement. They were saying Me Too movement went too far. Those men shouldn't have had to die. So there was a lot of mutual anger as those scandals fueled. And then that was the backdrop against which Yoon appeared on a pro-male platform in 2022, and then that kind of carried on until 2024, martial law and the whole pro-impeachment and yeah.
I just want to touch upon another line of division, maybe, which runs along generations. Demographics is perhaps the most critical challenge facing South Korea. The country has the lowest birth rate in the world. It has one of the fastest aging populations in the world, which is going to impact the economic prospects for Korea over the next 1 or 2 decades if nothing fundamentally changes. How do people see this issue, and is there any work being done towards finding a solution for it?
I mean, that's a great point. We are, like you said, we're the fastest aging society, along with Japan, I guess. The problem is we are actually running out of government fund to support the national health insurance in the long run. Old people, there's a government statistics that says old people require 3 times as much medical care and attention and medical bills as an average adult. So the government they need to reap more money, but then there will be fewer people paying taxes because the people within the working age population is shrinking, and more and more people are retiring. So we're going to be facing a severe financial difficulty within the foreseeable future. And then another problem is we lack doctors. We have an annual government quota on how many people can become doctors per year. That quota has been capped because of the medical community's pressure. Doctors didn't want too many of their fellows within their rank, otherwise their salary is going to go down. So, like I said, people over the age of 65, the government needs more money. The government needs more doctors to take care of our aging society. But is the government doing something about it? I don't think so. We are at a standstill. The medical system, the public insurance system hasn't been reformed for a while now. The only solution is for everyone to pay up more or extend the retirement age so that maybe the retirement age could go from 65 to 67. I mean, of course, people are not going to welcome this, but that I believe is a bit necessary given our situation. And also, we need to increase the number of doctors as well, because doctors are also retiring too. We're losing about 30,000 doctors by 2030. So I really want the government to tackle these two issues, the national insurance policy and the number of doctors.
We've been talking a lot about issues and troubles and problems Korea is facing, and there are plenty. I was thinking currently the Rietberg Museum here in Zurich is hosting Hallyu, an exhibition that before Zurich could be seen in the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, Boston and San Francisco. Really a celebration of Korean culture, of K-pop, K-drama. It's very much a celebration of South Korea and its culture. And it's just reading up on what's going on now, what's been happening over the past 6 months, it just seems like such a contradiction with the mood in the country itself. How do you see that?
You pointed something out that's very, that's very accurate actually. Like that's, you're right. Like we have South Korea has this global image as having a sophisticated culture, very, very upbeat and artistic talent. But then back home, we were actually quite gloomy and depressed. There's this significant divide between the mood abroad and the mood domestically. And it's something that we should, I just want to talk about the Korea discounts, because internationally, South Korea's image is very good, but domestically, like financial investors and tourists are spooked to come to Korea as a final destination of investment and tourism because of the looming danger of North Korea. But as it turns out, that looming danger was actually from within. That kind of like further discredited South Korea's image as having achieved a high level of democracy and high level of economy and culture. I mean, so our image was dealt a huge blow in that sense. But I hope that South Koreans abroad and foreigners abroad who love our culture, who love our content and our languages, I hope they can continue to advance our positive image abroad, while in the meantime we try to patch things up and improve our domestic situation so that our global image and domestic image can catch up with each other, and until things are on an even ground.
Do you see the gloom that you described that's present within South Korea? Do you see that being reflected in cultural output domestically, in songs or TV shows or movies? Or does that still just choose to ignore it, and maybe not ignore it, but offer a way out for people to just, let's forget about the gloom and listen to this really poppy music or these bright colors in movies or whatever?
Interesting question. As I observed, our cultural content hasn't really been reflecting our political situations or the general miasma, the general feeling of unease that's widely felt within the public. So our cultural content has been more trying to distract us from what's going on in our daily life and in politics. So I mean that's what South Koreans are really good at. We're really good at distracting. We're really good at repressing our emotions, and that's what's happening. Maybe perhaps after the snap election, some people are going to try to make some content related to martial law itself, but I haven't really seen much on something that reflecting how we feel overall.
Yunho Lee, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciated it.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a great time talking with you, and thank you for great questions.
That was Yunho Lee speaking from Seoul on the many issues facing South Korea after having gone through a severe constitutional crisis over the past 6 months, and while the country is about to elect a new president. If you want more Korea, and why wouldn't you, you're especially well suited if you're in Zurich. On Wednesday, June 25th, Asia Society Switzerland is hosting Korean author Bora Chung. She's made a big entrance on the international literary scene with her short story collection Cursed Bunny, which gives a dark yet humorous insight into modern Korean society. Tickets for this event in Zurich are on sale now via our website. A link is in the show notes. And that's where you also find a link to the Hallyu exhibition, a celebration of Korean culture currently on show at the Rydberg Museum in Zurich. And while we're at it, in the show notes also a link to the excellent analysis on the division and uncertainty facing South Korea's next president by Carnegie Senior Fellow Chung-Min Lee. We'll be back again soon with more. Be sure to subscribe to State of Asia in your favorite podcast app to not miss out. For now, my name is Remco Tanis. Thanks very much for listening.